many of which are people who served in the local level, particularly the ones that are on my side. Some were school committee, some were selectmen, some had served on both. I think there is a desire to be as protective and supportive of Chapter 70 funding and get back to the 5-year plan that we'd had about trying to get to 17.5%. You know, there are some frustrations depending on where you're situated in the community, because there's certain anomalies with the formula that impact people slightly differently. But I think there's a real desire to be as supportive as possible. You know, but it is frustrating because, you know, we didn't want to make a commitment to a local aid resolution. And I would make the argument that was only in our rules. It wasn't a statute. It wasn't a constitutional requirement. It was sort of the lowest level of requirement we could put out there and say, let's, within our own rules, try to do this for cities and towns. And quite frankly, our inability to give good numbers to our communities is I think, part and parcel the primary reason why we've changed our town meeting, our April town meeting, to a later date. Because we'd gotten to the path where it was sort of, we're doing it every year, so we might as well just make it part of the plan and whatever expectation, as opposed to, and there was a long time, it was a while, for a long time when I was on the board, we were still able pretty much to go in April and not have to worry, but the data and the information has gotten so much further delayed. It's very frustrating. You know, we did a municipal, and this maybe is a segue to next issue, we did a municipal relief package last year that I don't think contained a lot of municipal relief. And I and a handful of others voted against it almost singularly because it didn't address anything. Regardless of what your vision is of health care on the municipal level, it is the biggest or one of the biggest cost drivers at the municipal level, and the municipal health care, the municipal reform piece didn't do anything on it at all. Regardless of what you think, should we, you know, immediate plan design, going from the threshold to get into it from a 70% vote to let's just say a simple majority vote, did nothing on it, and that was a source of frustration on my part. There's the address by the governor, or the governor's budget, the address I think at MMA, the speaker's comments on swearing-in day, I think indicate that they know we have to make some movement on this issue. What exactly that will ultimately look like is an open question. But there's absolutely, I think, the need, the desire, the pressure. What is frustrating to me is that, for instance, the governor proposed a cut in unrestricted aid, and we make up that. His idea of making that up is sort of on the healthcare. So it isn't like the next step forward for cities and towns to deal with. It's, oh, this is going to offset what we're taking away. So at the end of the day, even if you get it done and we get it done and help you get it done, we're not necessarily that much further ahead. So it's not like, well, this is the next, we can't continue to increase money, so it's an offset, but this is going to be the offset to reduced money. That's what's frustrating for me. But there are a number of proposals out there. Again, changing the vote, plan design, timeline, plan design by local referendum, plan design that may require some negotiation over a portion of the savings, any variety of things. So, and I know I was at the board's meeting, and I think you guys, you had a pretty good presentation from your consultant, who's since been in touch. So.
Before we move on, does anyone have questions on Chapter 70 or local aid? Yes.
I don't know, can you give us any idea of if Chapter 78 is working theoretically the way it's supposed to? I mean, I guess when I look at the local funding report, it seems like it's gone up 0.5% straight across the board, and then unrestricted aid's gone down 7.2%.
Right.
It's my understanding the formula is supposed to work based on enrollments and that sort of thing.
Well, one of the challenges with the formula and enrollments is that, again, it's based on, so October's enrollments.
I know, there's a lag.
So there's a lag.
Yeah.
No, I think overall it's working if you look at it in terms of how, let's say, our students score compared to other states, that the investment in education has, in the aggregate, it may not, you know, internally within the state, there may be communities that do better under the formula than others, but in terms of the investment, I think it's generally worked pretty well. Has it worked perfectly? No. You know, there was the first court case that led to education reform in 1993, and there was a subsequent court case, and the court said, you know, we weren't going to take any action or recommend anything at the time because they thought, the court thought, in evaluating that we were moving in the right direction.
But I guess I'm asking, is the formula working theoretically the way it's supposed to be, or is this just getting thrown totally into the political realm where?
No, I think it's generally working. What's frustrating is we tried to get to the point where we would get to the 17.5%, but because we're not, we don't have additional revenues, it's always a challenge. Now, everybody comes in with a different tweak. One of the things we've tried to do is this adequacy study to basically say, is it adequate? Is the formula adequate in terms of the aggregate dollars, and is the formula adequate in terms of the distribution of the dollars? And we've been kind of put off many times. It's quite frankly, the administration could go forward with it. It was actually made as part of the sort of the race to the top, the underperforming schools. And a lot of us supported that legislation with the specific idea that none of the communities I represent were going to fall into that with those categories of funding. Now, as one who believes that good education is sort of all of our interests, not just, well, I should only care about North Reading kids and heck with everybody else. But the reality is, I care about the kids in my district more than some other representative does, as is the case. Likewise, they should care more about the kids in their district than maybe I do, but together we should all be concerned. And I don't mind focusing time and energy on underperforming and maybe give some enhanced tools, as long as the idea isn't that you're going to take resources from my district in order to fix that problem, when I feel that for the dollars that we get and the product that we turn out, we do a pretty good job get a pretty good bang for the buck, and for a few bucks more, a few dollars more, I think the value added would be almost exponentially, whereas in some areas you feel like you could double the money and you're not going to get any change. Whereas if you went to, I think in addition to most of the communities I represent, if you could spend another $500 a student or $1,000 a student, you'd get a noticeable step forward in terms of the programming, the things that the principals or your administrators were able to offer, instead of maybe basics. But it's one of the other frustrations, and with the governor, when he came in, he had this whole educational paradigm, and I always was concerned that we were going to neglect the core of what we thought, but generally everybody thought education should be about, to kind of do the add-ons. And if we can't do the core right, I don't think we have a lot of business trying to do the add-ons right. I think circumstances have kind of meant that he has to get away from that quite a bit.
So actually, I noted that as well, because my concern was with the expansion, with focusing on the gap in the lower performing schools. I'm concerned that the overall bench of education could be lowered, because again, we don't fall into that category, but we're currently at a core level services. We're not enhancing our education,
right,
the quality of our education. We're not making our kids any more prepared to go out there and compete globally. Right. We're not even introducing a language until high school. So we need to step back and say, we do need to close the education gaps, but we also need to not lose sight or have the education gaps catch up to the education bench, thereby or inadvertently lowering that bench. So is that something that you are lobbying with your colleagues to?
Well, I think one of the things in terms of some of the underperforming schools, some of it was the way you put programs or the management tools or things that were sort of non-financial tools that were put in place that didn't necessarily represent a jeopardy to our districts. And obviously there was a piece of this was about being able to apply and secure race to the top funds that were obviously going to be largely targeted too. I think, as I recall, North Reading didn't sign up for it. Reading did. I don't know off the top of my head, Linfield and Middleton did through Masco. But and there was, to me, I think the concern was in North Reading, and Mel, please jump in, was that, look, for the potential strings attached and the things we may have to jump through to get what probably is going to represent a very modest, is probably a generous term, amount of money, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, that's correct. I think we're looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000, and we're already getting indications from other towns that are in our same sort of strata that did go into the program that it's costing them more already than the money they're getting from the state and federal government, and we didn't see the benefit of it.
Right. Obviously, the other change that's happened pretty dramatically educational is the governor and the Board of Ed has changed into a line, sort of a national standard, and I know there was at least a lot of behind the scenes, supposedly review of that. I don't think there was as much public review of that as there should be, and I think there's a lot of apprehension, particularly when you see sort of test score after test score after test score on a relative scale, Massachusetts doing very well, and then saying, well, is this about everybody else coming up to our standard, or is this about us going down to some other standard? And one of the letters I had written was to the board to say, defer putting off your vote, because if you have the confidence that you've really done your due diligence, then go on a road show and convince people that this is. I mean, for most people, their kids are their most precious resource, and they care deeply. And while we may not be doing everything perfectly within Massachusetts, relatively speaking, we're doing pretty good. And it may be that, now again, maybe relative to what other countries are doing, we still have a long way to go, but Massachusetts relative to other states is still doing a pretty good job. And not wanting to jeopardize that. And I'm very concerned about that. And again, I'm not completely convinced that isn't going to entail a shift in curriculums and text and all this, and some of those dollars aren't going to be ultimately, or need for dollars are going to show up down the road. And I'm still not sold on that yet. So, I mean, what's done is done, but we have to watch that.
Okay. Yes.
Cliff. What you mentioned the needs study, Brad. Do you have any idea where that stands? I know it's supposed to be due December 11th of this year.
Yeah, it's in a snowbank somewhere right now.
I think it's on my road.
The reality is, I think the administration and some people don't want to do it because they're afraid of what it's going to say about well, we're not doing enough, we're not doing more, and the problem becomes there's probably any variety of people, any variety of proposals to change the formula. Usually they're driven on, the reality is, well, I want to change it because I think one factor is too low, one factor is too high. I used to represent North Andover, and as I recall, there was a wage inflation factor in there somewhere, but they were grouped in with New Hampshire, so their wage base, even though, by moving from North Andover into like the Boston area, the wage thing, it would change the formula and got them another, $300,000 or $400,000, as I recall. So there's all kinds of those kind of factors. So it's not really moving. I will check on it again, but we've been frustrated by this numerous times, and we've tried to move it forward.
We belong to the North Shore Coalition of School Funding, which is a group of about 16 communities. And last year at this time, we did a study on what about unfunded mandates? What do they cost? What is how much does Chapter 70 funding do for us, and so forth? And basically what we found was that the foundation budget, which is the basis for Chapter 70, covered about 71% of what it was costing those communities, which represented 12 communities. The study actually ended up by covering 10 school districts, which covered 12 communities out of the 16. And it was about 71%. That's really short of where it ought to, and that says that the foundation budget needs to be revised. And so we're very anxious to see what comes out of the needs study. Okay. And then when you look at how much Chapter 70 money came in and covered cost, we were looking at around 15% of the cost, and the unfunded mandates came up around 25%. So that study was quite revealing. We actually made I don't know whether you were.
No, somebody was there. I think there was a gentleman named Dave Whalen was involved with that. Dave's from Swampscott, I believe.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Dave is a frequent emailer. I've met him